It is September 22nd. We have a few more days of A and a few more days of B, and then one e-learning at the end, but you don't want to do your work at the last second on that day. Let's try to just complete a little bit each time and smoothly get to the end with no stress. Yesterday I posted something because I saw people working on Unit 6 and I wanted to answer more questions from later in the unit. If you're fine without it, you don't have to watch that, but if you're interested, check it out. Today I'm going to look at the project. The project I've already discussed, but now I want to say, hey, let's see what it would be like if you opened up and started typing. Now, just to recap, I showed a video of a guy making a quiz game with basic Python, and if you followed that, you would end up with something like this. It's got a question and then another one that's just copy pasted, and then another one that's just copy pasted, and so on. And I talked about the drawbacks of that, how it gets long, and if you wanted to change something, you have to change it in all of them, and you heard me talk about this multiple times. Today, I'm going to say, well, let's make it better. Let's use our new thing from Unit 6, functions, to write a couple lines of how to do a question in general, and then each one of these we can just call up that and say, hey, do that again. And then they're all guaranteed to be consistent with each other. If we want to change it, we can change the function. If we want to add one, we can just call it again and not add a bunch of lines. Yada, yada, yada. So I'm going to go Control A to select all, and then Control C to copy. I'm going to put this in a sandbox thing, which is probably what you guys are going to use. But if you want to do it on Replit, this website here that you might have seen last year, that's perfectly fine. I like it a lot. No problem. But assume you're using CodeHS, which is what we've been used to recently. Let's paste this guy into here. Let's hit run to make sure there's no error at the beginning, because that would be a tragedy if you pasted it, changed a bunch of stuff, saw an error, and then it turns out there was some typo all along, you know. But this looks like it is working. And I'm going to get some right and some wrong, and it does total it up correctly. So our job this first go at it, and you might take a few sittings for this, it's a bigger project, is to make a function instead of copying this, copying this, copying this. Let's copy it once into a separate little zone here. I'll put it right here just because it's visually next to the thing we're looking at, but we can move it later. And I'm going to say def, which means define. We're defining a thing. And I'm going to call this ask question. You can call it whatever you want, but generally with a function you want to have a verb at the beginning. If I just called this def question, then it might be easy to confuse with the variable, with other stuff, you know. And then parentheses, there's going to be stuff in there later, but we don't have to do it all at once. And then the magic symbol that we always use when we're starting if or while or anything, you put a colon. Okay. Now, whenever you do hit colon, it'll automatically indent when you hit enter, and now I'm going to paste that stuff from a minute ago. So, every time we ask a question, we're going to do this, or some version of this. And then, whenever we're doing these guys, we don't have to call these lines again. We can just say, ask question, ask question, ask question, with some specific changes each time, right? So, we have to ask ourselves, what's exactly the same every time versus what's a little bit different, okay? And I'll go ahead and say all this stuff is exactly the same. There's going to be some test of did they type the right thing, and if so, we're going to give them a point, tell them correct. If not, we say incorrect. I've seen people mess with this, like on one person yesterday, they made it so that if they get it wrong, it'll tell them the right answer. so that it's not a mystery. That's reasonable, unless you want them to do it multiple times and then you don't want to give it away. It's all up to you. But that stuff's going to be the same every time. This stuff is not, right? When we ask a question, the stuff in quotes is going to be slightly different each time. It's going to ask something new, and then it's going to be looking for something new. So this is the stuff that's going to be unique to each question. And that's the stuff that's going to go in the parentheses, because the parentheses are what we supply it with as what we call parameters. Okay, it's going to know that, hey, we're going to get a few inputs this time, and then we're going to use them. So what do we get as inputs? Well, the first thing is going to be question, and then the second thing is going to be answer. I know that sounds simple, and it is simple. We'll figure out if those names are great for our purposes, but it's a nice start. And I'm going to put those in the parentheses. So that means every time we do this function, we're going to give it what do we ask and what are we looking for. And then it's going to go through all those steps. The name answer is a little weird because it's going to be right next to this ANS thing. And so we don't want to confuse the answer that the user types with the answer in the answer key that we're looking for. We might want to change the name a little bit to make it more specific. For example, you might want to call this correct answer. Okay, it's not set in stone. You can call it various things as long as it makes sense to you and it makes sense to a reasonable person glancing at this, by which I mean me. Now, is that it? Is that all we need? Maybe. You never want to do everything perfect on the first try. You want to put a sort of loose version out there, try it and see what happens, and go from there. Okay, just like when I initially typed this, I left the parentheses blank and then I went back. If you tell yourself that it has to be perfect and you have to just go down the line and get everything exactly lined up, then you're going to be stuck a lot. Would somebody get the door, please? Whereas if you write something, fix it, write something, fix it, you're going to be doing very nice evolving as you go. So let's imagine that this is our function. It turns out it's going to be pretty good. We might need to change something, but once we've got this, we don't need to do any of these because this is all repetition. It's unnecessary. Now it's made once. We just have to say the name of the thing and then what we're supplying it with. So instead of all this nonsense, we can say ask question with the question and the answer. And then we can go get that out of here. And then for the next guy, we can say ask question, if I could type, and then send it the question and the answer, and then get all this nonsense out of here. And then how about another one? And then put the answer. And you can see right away we're saving a lot of space. Every time I do this, I'm deleting 5 or 6 lines. And if I had more and more questions, I would be saving more and more each time, right? So let's stop here because the fourth one is slightly different. We'll see how it goes. But even though currently this program does the exact same thing, it is shorter than it was a few minutes ago. However, there is one issue. If I hit run, it's actually going to give me an error, so we can talk about what that is. If I hit run, it's going to still do the beginning part, and it's going to say, do you want to play yes or no? If it loads. Apparently it's going slow at the moment. And it's going to ask me the question, and then it's going to go, wait a minute. We've got one issue, which is that this variable right here, the score, it's not quite sure what that means. Because instead of being loose code floating around in the main, it's inside of a function. And whenever you're inside of a function, you're generally using local variables, which are just in that little world, and they're not affecting things outside, and they're not affected by things outside. They're just doing their own little job in their own little world, like the ANS right here. It shows up, it gets used in the next line, and then it's never ever seen again. So it's kind of expecting the score to be like that, and it's saying, what is this thing we're working with? How can we add one to it when it hasn't been created? And we have to work with that. Now, luckily, last time I showed an example of just this kind of problem. In the Unit 6 of the Code.hs, there was one where it had a local variable that was trying to be used outside, and it couldn't, and I showed you that there are 3 different ways to fix that. Probably more, in theory. Right now, I'm thinking that there are 2 that would be pretty good for this situation. One, we could have the score return. We could put that as a return thing, and then it would, just as the parameters or things that it takes in, return the things that it spits out, and then it would send it back to this code that called it, and this code could do something with the score. That's very reasonable. Another thing, which I wouldn't exactly recommend right now, but it's totally possible, is that this function could send the score to another function or to another part of the program that handles score all on its own and that keeps track of that, and at the end we ask that part of the code, like, hey, what's that score you've been keeping track of the whole time? But one way to do it that's actually the easiest, even though it's a bit of a cheat and you don't want to do this all the time, but we can just say, inside of our function, we can say global score, meaning, hey, there's this variable score, and we're going to use it inside and outside of the function, and we're going to say it's the same guy. Every time we run this, we're talking about the same score, and we're not starting a new one or anything like that. Okay, so I'm going to use this for the moment, even though generally you don't want to do global variables inside and outside of a function because it can get messy. You want to have your things like in their own little world and not reaching into other parts of the program and messing with them. But this will work in the moment. Let's hit run, and we can always go back and fix it later. I really want to show you guys that you want to write stuff one step at a time. Go back and fix errors after you start them. You don't want to try to like hold it all in your head and do it all perfectly on the first try. You want to write some stuff and then make a few changes as you go. So if I hit run, now it's going to work. Not quickly. Maybe we have an issue with our network connection, but it will work. I guess I'll hit stop and try again. I don't know if you see this on your Chromebook. Sometimes the Code.hs little console over here sometimes takes a while to run, but that's okay. I'll just keep talking. If I hit run here, it would work. It would say, what's the best programming language? We would say something right or wrong, and then for this guy and this guy, same thing. And since we have this global score line, it's going to treat this score as adding to the big score that we started at the beginning, and it will keep the total all throughout. And if we got 3 right, it would say 3 right at the bottom. Now, once you get to question 4, now it's loaded. Let's do it. Let's get 1 right. Let's get 1 right. Let's get 1 wrong. And let's get one right, and it's going to say we got 3 out of 4, 75%. So that did work. Question 4, if you notice, it has a different feature, which is 2 possible answers. We don't have that built into our function, so it would be hard to import this into this. Now, you're writing your own questions. You don't have to go with the ones this guy made. So you don't have to make a question with 2 possible answers. But let's say you did. There is a section in Unit 6 of the Code.HS that tells you how to make optional parameters that you don't use every time. And so we could add one that's like secondary answer, blah, 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 and then go from there. If you were going to make it optional, then you would say equals something. And then if they don't put anything, it will just go to this default value, and it won't matter that they left that part blank. When we use the range function, we've been using the range function recently. Sometimes you put 1, sometimes you put 2 or 3, and that's how they create it with stuff like this. So you can do that, but you don't have to. The point is, we're all editing this now. This main, not main, because that has a different meaning, but this core function that we're going to use a lot, we can put all the features in here and then just use them when needed each time. And that means your quiz is just going to be like, I'm adding 1 line, I'm adding 1 line, I'm adding 1 line. And then it's very easy to add 1 or take away 1 or change 1. And if you want to change how it works, you change this and it'll automatically affect them all. And that's the kind of solid foundation that we want to get to. So if you're starting your project, you want to do something like that. And then if you're adding features or making it better, you edit this, and it will automatically filter through to affect all these other guys. I'll stop here, and I'll make another video next time about some more stuff you see in the sort of second half of your project when you're getting past this. Thanks.